Okay, we're gonna jump back at it. If I can get everyone in this class to do me a favor, there's a file that I want you to open to work on. So it's going to be in our session 5. There's a file in there called Choke and Spread. If you can actually open that one up. And double click on the hand. So to take a look at what we've actually got here, I've got a smart object that's actually got an image on, a layer mask on it. Yeah, and I need to show you guys something about how this whole thing looks and how this whole thing sort of works. I'm going to take this layer mask. You can see it. The image itself is. Did everybody find this image? Okay, Choke and Spread inside session 5. It's the only thing we didn't get to last week. If you double click on the smart object of the image, you can actually see it is a raw file. It'll go right back into it. And this is just the raw file. It's been color balanced, so you don't need to worry about that part. However, I can take this entire thing, the mask as well as the object itself, and I can actually turn that into a smart object as well. And there's an inherent advantage to that, and I want to show you guys what that advantage is. If I come up here on the very top, so before I turn it into another smart object, I'm going to just add a blank layer on the top right here. And with this blank layer, I'm just going to hit the B key to get a paintbrush. Now, red is my foreground color. It doesn't really matter what your foreground color is. We're just going to paint a line across this layer. Make sure that the blending mode is set to normal. It doesn't really matter what kind of brush edge you have. Mine's a 50% hardness, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and I'm simply going to click and I'm going to drag a line around like that. And so you can sort of see basically what's going on in this part right here. If I grab my image layer and drag it up on top of this, you can actually see that it still shows that entire part is actually still happening on here. However, what I'm struggling with here is that I'm struggling with a very slow computer that's very long, took a long time to actually redraw that part. The part that I'm struggling with here is that this is not treating this as a transparent, it's not respecting the transparency that this mask is actually supposed to be engineering on this. So you can see if you actually look at this, it does have a layer mask on it, but it also appears that the entire pixel content of all, you see the green screen, all of that kind of stuff is going on here. So if I were to like transform this thing, let's say I wanted to transform and scale it, so I would do Command T on this. Never mind, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'm not going to actually transform this. I just want to show you that there's an advantage to turning this into a smart object. And the advantage of turning this into a smart object is this. If we come up to the layer menu, make sure again you've got the image with the mask on it selected, layer menu, come down to smart objects and say convert to smart object. This is now going to create a nested smart object, and you can see that my image has got complete transparency around it. Now when I throw this guy up on the top of this, you can actually see it's respecting transparency no matter where I go with this guy, which is not the case when it was before. So, and if I were to do a transform on this, if I hit Command T to do a transform on this, it's actually going to pick a smaller set of controls for me. It doesn't need to pick the entire, actually that's the wrong image, so Command T. It only picks the figure, unlike if it was before we turned this into a smart object and I wanted to do a transform on this, it would pick the entire green screen. To show you what I mean by that, go back in your history just before you actually, or hit the at the very top of your options palette, hit the little circle with the slash through it to undo that transform. Go back in your history to right before you converted this thing to a smart object. Now if I do transform on this very same layer, Command T, you'll notice that it actually puts the control handles all the way out to the very edge. We can't see them right now, so I'm going to hit, again, the circle with the slash through it. I'm going to hit the F key to go to the pasteboard, and then Command T. And you'll notice my control handles are actually all the way outside my image. So this was having to contend with the entire green screen background, with everything else that's going on in here, which I don't feel the need, or I don't really want to actually have to deal with that part. So I am going to, again, hit the circle to undo that part. I'm going to throw away that layer that I put the little squiggles on. I'm going to convert this image and its mask to into a nested smart object. So the smart object raw file is not going to go away. I'm just actually, it's in an envelope right now. I'm just going to take all of this envelope with the mask on it, and put it into another envelope. That's all I'm doing. Up to the layer menu, down to convert to smart object, convert to smart object. A lot of the things that we do later on are going to actually help us out when we get to this part. Actually, I take that back because I haven't done, the whole purpose of this was to actually do a choke and mask on this. So hit Command Z to undo that. Don't worry guys, I'll get this together sooner or later. So this is just my image as it started. If you want to just come back to the very beginning, click on the top state of history, this is what we're going to end up working with. Okay, if we zoom into this girl's shoulder, you actually will see a problem that we run into in all of digital photography. So you can see that there is a green line that actually traces her body. And the reason that that's happening is in digital, and this happens no matter what you're trying to do. You guys all know about raw sharpening. When you actually open, double click on the, just on the smart object to bring you into Camera Raw. If you come into Camera Raw and you actually come down to Detail and you open up the Detail slider, you will actually see that there is some sharpening that's already in here. This is raw file sharpening. This is not output sharpening. This is raw file sharpening. It's input sharpening. And the reason that we have this is that when a sensor actually takes the image information, you make an exposure, it hits the sensor, every single pixel that is in that sensor is only recording a single color, either red, green, or blue. It's not recording all of them. We need to look at this really quickly because you guys need to know. So hang on one second. Sorry. Okay. I'm not going to run this as a slideshow so that I'm still able to show, because I'd lose a cursor if I do that. In a nutshell, right here, all sensors are black and white. There is no such thing as a color sensor. They all simply light photons come into. This is the sort of a side, sort of a cutaway of what a sensor looks like. And every place where there is a pixel, there are these little buckets, and they're literally like physical buckets. Some people call them photocavities. Some people call them photosites, light cavities, photo buckets. It all refers to the same thing. And if you take a look at colored light, so these would all be photons, red, green, and blue photons. They simply come into these things and they collect them. And what they do is they add up the number of photons. And if you, like in this case right here, if you've got a lot of them, it's a light area of your image. In this case, if you don't have many of them, it's a dark area of your image. But this can only actually show you grayscale. It doesn't care whether the photons are red, green, and blue. It doesn't care about any of that stuff. It's just the number that actually fall in here. Doing color in digital is extremely challenging, and there was a guy named Bayer who figured this out years ago, back in the 60s or 70s. He worked for Kodak, and this is the method that he came up with. What he said was, you know, we can introduce color by actually putting filters on top of every one of those photo buckets. So if you take a look at this guy right here, what he did was he puts filters on top of every one of these photo buckets right here. And so you can see that the first one is a blue filter, then a green filter, blue filter, green filter. They alternate. And then the next line down is green, red, green, red, green, red, and the next line down. So he does this. And what happens is that the only photons that can come through are of the color of the filter. So again, we talk about why do you see? Why is this piece of paper right here that I'm holding up yellow? Anybody? Exactly. What's happening is that this room essentially has got white light in it that's got all the colors in the rainbow. They all hit this piece of paper. The ink that's in this paper that makes it yellow absorbs every color of the rainbow except for yellow. It reflects yellow back to you and you see yellow. The same process holds true for filters, except instead of it reflecting it back, it lets it pass through. So if I had a yellow filter here instead of a piece of paper, that yellow filter would absorb all the colors of the rainbow except for yellow, and it would allow yellow light to pass through it. Make sense? Same thing is going on right here. This is this process. The blue filters only allow blue light to come through. The green filters only allow green light to come through, and the red only allow red to come through. So at every single pixel, we've only got one color, but we need 3 colors for all of them. Have you ever thought that when you actually take a raw file, it starts out at 20 megabytes, but you process it, it turns into 60 megabytes? The reason that happens is that the raw file only contains one color for every single pixel. But a processed file, a file that you've run through Camera Raw or Capture One or Bibble or any of the other processors, it actually has to add the other 2 colors for every single pixel. And you end up with 3 values instead of 1, so your file size triples. Does that make sense, everyone? Am I losing anybody on this? Are we good on that part? That's why actually raw files are the best compression you can actually have, because they're 1/3 of the size of a processed file, but they have all the information that happened in your raw capture. It's the best way to store stuff. You can't do any compression, in my opinion, anyway, that is better than that, because it's lossless. It's every bit of the original material, but it's 1/3 of the size of a processed file. So at any rate, you need to come up with the other colors. And so this is the trick, and this is how they do it. They do it with, it's very complicated math. This is a very simple version of it. There's all sorts of, they call this demosaicing. This thing is basically a mosaic. And the demosaicing means how do we come up with the other colors that we need to fill in for every single pixel. So we're going to take this pixel right here, R19. All it stands for is row number 19. It's not anything special. It's got a red filter on it, so it's allowing red light to come through it. So that's the R value of this pixel is not a problem. But we need to come up with the green value and the blue value. And the way all these demosaicing algorithms work is that to come up with the blue value, what it's going to do is it looks at the pixels that are nearby. So it's going to look at this B14, B16, B24, and B22. it adds the 4 of these up and divides by 4. It takes the average of the 4 that are around it and it assigns that value to R19. That's where they get the blue value. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on? To get the green value, they do the same thing. They take G18, G15, G20, G23. They add those up and divide by 4. They take the average of them, and that's the green value that actually happens here. But the problem we have with that is not legitimate. We are taking detail from around this pixel and averaging it and then plugging that value into this R19, and we do it with the blue as well. All of those other 2 values are made up by math, and when you do that, your image gets soft because you don't have the discrete pixel count or photon count for what was at R19. You're actually taking information from the stuff that's around it and you're bringing it in, and it softens up your image. So your image by definition has to have input sharpening, and that's what is going on here. This is input sharpening. By default, this is set to 25 in Photoshop. These values change depending on the camera that you're using, but it's always 25. But the amount will actually change. If you were using a medium format digital back, it would be more sharpening than this version is for this file right here. So it's already being sharpened. The consequence of that, though, I'm going to hit cancel here and zoom in, is that what sharpening does is it looks for edges and it does contrast along edges. And so we have actually got a contrast move that's happening right along this edge. And the problem with that is that I'm actually able to select the green and knock it out. But because that edge has had contrast added to it, there is all right along this edge, there is an area of darker green and lighter green to try to give me a sharper edge in this. So the algorithm that is designed to get rid of all that input softening, all that demosaic softening, also creates this really hard edge line on this, and you will see this forever. I don't care how many selections, knockouts that you do, unless you go in with a pen tool and actually do this part. So that's a problem for me. This is not spill. This is a contrast edge. Now, so do this. Go ahead and select the layer mask that's in here just to make it active. And then either click on Select and Mask that's in the Properties menu, or come up to the Select menu and come down to Select and Mask. Remember I said we've got all these global refinements, and in these global refinements you can smooth your edges, you can feather them, you can add contrast, and you can shift your edges. But I told you that there was a better way of actually doing this, and the better way of doing this right now is what I'm going to show you. I don't ever use this stuff to modify my edges. And the reason I don't do that is that it's extreme. Once you do it, it does it to your entire image. You cannot be selective about it. This goes back to exactly what you were talking about before. Is there a way I can do part of that on one part of my image but not on another part of my image? And that's what we do using choke and spread, as opposed to actually using these edge shift controls right here. So I'm going to hit cancel out of here. We don't need to do that part. I need everybody to create a quick synthetic file for me. So again, Command N to bring up the new dialog box. I'm going to do 8 by 10 inches at 300 pixel per inch resolution, and I'm going to say OK to that. It gives me an image right here. I am going to fill this image with black. So to get to my default foreground and background colors, just hit the D key. That makes black is now my foreground color. So with black being my foreground color, I'm going to hit Option Delete, fills this with black. And I don't know why I've all of a sudden got this black pasteboard action that's going on in here, but I do. So nonetheless, I'm going to hit Command J to actually duplicate that part. And I'm also going to reset my workspace. And I'm going to double click on the hand so that I only see the image. And this is not working. It's keeping me on the other pasteboard. Oh, I'm sorry. I was actually on a pasteboard there. Never mind. OK, so I've got a black image that's actually got, there's 2 layers that are actually on here. I've got my rulers showing. If your rulers are not showing, Come up to the view menu, come down to put a check mark right next to rulers. You should always have your ruler showing. I'm just going to define a loose box and using guidelines. So I'm just clicking on the ruler, dragging down. I've got 2 horizontal guidelines. I'm going to click on the ruler on the left and come across, and I've got 2 other hard lines that are. I'm just trying to actually define this space that I've actually got going right here. Yeah, so I'm going to make a selection of this space that I've actually got right here. So to do that, come up to the toolbar. The second tool down is the marquee tool. Click on the tool, come over to rectangular marquee. Make sure that your feathering is set to 0. Make sure that your style is set to normal. Once you set that to normal, you won't have any width or height in there. I need to make a perfect selection of this. Now, a lot of you can find it's pretty easy to come in and click on the where the 2 guides are crossing on the top left-hand corner. However, for me, a preferred method is to simply click and drag in the space itself. So you can take a look at me. You can see I've got a small rectangular set of marching ants going. I'm going to hold down the space bar and I can move this around. And what I do is I goose this up so that the top left-hand corner is touching my guides. Let go of the space bar, and then you can complete you can complete this and actually drop it down to the lower right-hand corner. I'm going to jump this to its own layer, Command J. You can see that I've actually got this selection that's actually sitting out here. And if we zoom in and take a look at this guy, you can see that it fits perfectly inside of the guidelines that I had. I'm going to go down to my bottom background and fill this with white, so just to make it easier and we can sort of see what it's actually on. So I'm going to go to my bottom down all the way down to my background layer. White is my background color, so Command Delete will actually fill that with white if I turn the eyeball on. So I've got a black square on a white field, and you can actually take a look at this. If we zoom in, I'm going to come into the corner so that you can actually see it a little bit better. I'm actually going to then go up to that top layer that is just this square, and I'm going to blur this guy. So if we come in and take a look at the edge right now, you can see that I've got white and then I've got black, but I've got nothing in between. I've got my guidelines showing. If the guidelines bother you so that I don't want to move them, but if I don't want to see them, hit Command H. It will actually hide them. But on this background, on this black square layer, so it's my very top layer, I'm going to blur this. And what I'm going to do, so I'm going to come up to the filter menu and I'm going to come down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And I'm going to hit this pretty hard. I'm going to come up with I'm going to put 4 pixel blur on this guy and say OK. And what you can see that I've done, what a blur really is it looks at the color and the tone of the image that I've got. It looks at the color and the tone of the part that's on the background, and it actually then essentially puts in a gradient between what I had originally, which was jet black on a hard edge, and that white background. So if you take a look, if you hover your cursor over the inside of the black square, you can get your readout and you can see you're still 0, 0, 0. But as you start to go across that softened up edge, you will see that you start to get tones, but they're grays like here. So when I first start to move out of the jet black area, I get I've got a 35, 35, 35, very low level, so it's a very dark gray. As I continue to move in that direction, I get into middle tones, and as I start to come up, I'm getting into lighter grays, lighter grays, lighter grays, and then finally when I get all the way to the very top, I go back to white again. So what I've done by blurring this is that I've introduced levels of gray that are in between the two now. I don't go from black to white. I go from black through a whole series of grays before I get to white. I can now leverage the fact that I've got those grays in there. Hit Command L to bring up your levels dialog box. I take it back. If you've done that, hit cancel really quick. Hit Command H. I want to bring the guides back so that I can actually see what they're doing. So you can actually see, yep.
For some reason, when I did the marquee tool and I pull it up, my black box isn't coming up. It keeps it's making my background
Show me.
transparent. So if I'm here and then I command jump, it'll
You need to start on that layer though. So hit Command D to deselect, throw away those top 2 layers. Good. Do your selection now on that black layer. Yep. Perfect. And hit Command J. Boom.
But it's not like it's not the same. It's still black.
Oh, well, you can turn the eyeball of the black layer off.
Okay.
It's black on black. Got it? Okay, so then look what happens. So the reason I put on those guidelines is that so you can see what happened. Remember, those guidelines were the original of my image, right? Bring up Levels dialog box, Command L, and look what happens. I can use my Levels dialog box to tell Photoshop what I want to do with these mid-tones of gray. So I'm going to grab my shadow point slider, the black point slider, on the bottom of the histogram. I'm going to click on it and start to drag to the right and watch what happens to that image. Absolutely nothing happens to that image, so hang on 1 second. I'm going to actually merge this all into one. So I just threw away that middle layer. I'm going to select my top layer right now, hit Command E, just so that I've got that really fuzzy thing on a white layer. So sorry guys, I should have practiced this before I did this today. So does everybody have a really fuzzy sort of edge on a white layer, all into one? We good on this part? Let's start this all over. Come all the way up to where you just open this file up. I'm going to leave this background exactly where it is right now. Go to your rulers and simply drag down 4 guidelines to give yourself something. Again, I'm just using the guidelines to show you where the original edge was. I'm going to just drag those out, hit the M key or select the marquee tool, click and drag, hold down your Shift key to actually put the top right-hand corner, top left-hand corner on where the 2 guidelines meet. Finish dragging out that part down there. Black is now my foreground color, so Option Delete will fill that with black. Command D to deselect. So you can see right now I've got this black that's actually hard edge that then goes to white. So I don't have any shades of gray that separate those 2. Come up to your filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and we can introduce a series of grays in here. So I put mine in, I'm going to do a little bit less. I'll do 3 pixels on mine and say OK to that. I'm going to zip back out so that you can see this. It's not so pixelated. So now what I've got is black in the center of this box. I've got white on the outside, and as I make the transition across that edge, I've got layers of gray. If I now bring up my Levels dialog box, Command L to bring up the Levels dialog box, I'm going to grab the black point slider underneath the bottom of the histogram on this, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag towards the right, and look what happens. What I'm saying to Photoshop is, I want you to take those mid-levels of gray and make them black. I am now spreading my mask. Does that make sense what just happened? I'm going to pull that all the way back, and instead I'm going to grab the white point slider and drag it to the left, and you'll now see that my black area is now coming inside those guidelines. This is actually choking this, making it smaller. I'm going to drag it back up so that we get somewhere in about the middle. So I'm going to come around so I've got sort of like a, maybe like, I don't know, somewhere in the 170s for my white point slider. I can actually grab my black point and drag it forward now, and I can actually sharpen that edge up as well. So not only can I choke or spread my mask, that's what we're going to end up doing with this, but I can also sharpen that edge if that's the case, because I'm just adding contrast to it. Make sense? All right, you can close this up. You can hit cancel on that. So let's put this thing into real practice using our selection. So I'm going to hit cancel here. I'm going to lose this. Don't save. All right, so I've got to deal with this line that's actually running along her body. And the trick of it is, it's the mask. I need to choke this mask down to get rid of that line. However, this is going to fuck up the hair really badly here. So if I take a look, I'm going to double click on the hand and zoom into the hair, you'll actually see that there's spill in the hair. That's fine. I can actually fix the spill, but I don't want to choke all of that away, because if I choke all of that away, what you'll end up seeing is that it loses all its believability. It's no longer feathery hair. That part's gone. So your first move before you do anything is to do a snapshot of what this looks like, a history snapshot of what it looks like before we choke it. So come over to your history palette, click on the little camera that's down at the very bottom. When you click on that, you should get a new snapshot dialog box that opens up. Does anyone not have this dialog box opening up? We all good? Call this pre-choke. And say okay. Then we're going to go ahead and do the choke. So I'm going to zoom into this area I'm going to look at her shoulder. That's the part that I really want to pay attention to, because you can see it the easiest. Make sure that your mask is selected. Again, we're doing all of this work on the mask itself. So the mask is selected. If you hold down the Option key and click on it, you'll again see that same situation. There's black on one side, there's white on the other side, but there's very few shades of gray that are in between those. I need to add those shades of gray in order for the choke or the spread to actually work. So I'm going to click back on the pixel content of the image and then on the mask again. So now I've got the mask is selected. The first thing I'm going to do is blur it. Up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And I'm going to hit this with a 3 pixel radius. Now, there is no standard value to put into this. The larger the resolution of your image is, the larger this number actually has to be. Most of the time, it's really just eyeballing this and using your preview to turn this on and off. And you can see what I'm doing is actually making the problem worse. I'm introducing those shades of gray in there. So if this doesn't work, if you end up with the wrong radius here, you simply go back in history and do it again. There's no way to undo that part or to fix that part. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to 3 pixels. And I'm going to say OK to that. And again, I just made this problem worse. If you hold on your Option key and you click, you will notice that you just added these layers of gray that are in between the two. But that's what I need to actually do the choking on this. So now, again, with my mask selected, Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And in this case, what I want to do is I want those shades of gray to actually, again, if you can't remember whether you do the black point slider up or the white, simply grab one and do it, and your image will either get better or it will get worse. In my case, so let's start with the white point slider just because it's the wrong one. If you grab the white point slider and start to drag it towards the left, you can see it makes the problem even worse. I get a really strong line on the side. But if I grab the black point slider and start to pull it towards the middle, you can see that that line goes away. And the reason that line is going away is I'm taking all of those levels of gray that represented the line on my mask, and I am actually making them black. And because I'm making them black, in effect, my mask has been choked in and it is smaller. Is this working for everyone? Is this not working for anyone? Mara, you okay over there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't know if that was a hand or not. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. Before we do anything else, though, take a look at what it did to the hair. It got rid of all that fine feathery hair part. This has destroyed this part of the mask, and I don't want that. I actually want both. So before I do anything else, I'm going to do another history snapshot. I'm going to click on the little history guy, and I'm going to call this post choke. And say OK to that. Then I am going to go back before I did any of these blur parts in here. I can actually go all the way back to my, I don't actually have a layer going on before this. I'm going to go back to what my image looked like when I first opened it up. So simply click on the choke and spread history state that's up at the very top. Now I've got the problem. It's still sitting on her her body, on the coat, that part. So I'm going to click on post choke. I'm not clicking on the history layer. If you click on the history state like this, it gets rid. It applies it to the entire image. That's not what I want to do. What I want to do is simply use the little icon of the history brush on the left of that post-choke icon. Simply put it there so that I can paint with what that history looked like when that state was actually made. Does that make sense to everyone? So at this stage of the game, I'm actually going to grab a tablet really quickly, although you don't need a tablet so much for this, but you're certainly going to need it later on. So if you've got one handy, go ahead and plug it in. Oh, and mine's not going to work right now anyway because I threw away a piece of software that I didn't like, and that's actually now my tablet. So at any rate, back to what we've got going on here. So make sure that you have got your layer mask is actually selected and active because we're going to use this history brush on your layer mask. We're going to select the history brush. Again, it's the one right underneath the clone stamp tool, history brush. All the tools of a brush you have here, so you can make your brush harder or softer. I'm going to leave mine at about a 50% hardness. It doesn't really matter. The history is going to really control what I can actually do here and what I can't. I am going to leave my blending mode as normal. I'm going to leave the opacity at normal and the flow, the opacity at 100% and the flow at 100%. And then I'm simply going to come over in this area right here. Again, I'm painting with history now on my layer mask, and simply click and start to paint, and you can see it will remove all of the green that's around this image. Now, that's terrific, but it's a whole lot for me to actually have to paint into this thing because I've got to do it all the way around her body. I've got to do it down, you can see it's running down her shorts, along her legs, it's running along the boots. There's a lot to actually paint. So instead, I'm going to go back in history to the very beginning, my choke and spread version of this. I am going to click on the post-choke state, which actually does the choke on everything, including her hair. But then I'm going to actually use the little icon saying, what state do you want to paint with? I'm going to put that little icon right next to the pre-choke icon state. And now I can come in again with my history brush and I can paint back what the hair looked like before this image was choked. So it brings back all the feathery hair. It brings back a lot of spill, but I know how to remove spill. So I'm just going to bring all of that part back because it was just faster. It got rid of the choke on everything. If you take a look at this, it's got everything again. Right now we can do another history snapshot of what this image looks like right now. I'm going to go ahead and click on it and just call it snapshot 1. I can now go between my original beginning when I opened this thing up with that, that line all the way around it to what my image looks now. Did this work for everyone? Game changer. Absolute game changer. You're not in there trying to paint this mask. You're not in trying to do any of that. One of the things that we need to look at, though, you need to go all the way down to the shoes, because what will happen is, if you take a look at her heels right now, I'm going to go back to what it looked like in the beginning and what it looks like now. And you can actually see that in certain cases, it'll actually eat into some of the image part that's actually on the top. That's actually the shoe part. So I want some of that to be choked. So I'm going to go back to this, but I want to bring some of it back, like this whole top edge of her boot. So I'm looking at her left shoe. That looks way too soft to me. So again, I'm going to use my pre-choke version of this, and I'm going to bring back in the definition of the boot. It's still got spill on it. So again, the area that was down on the sort of the top part of her shoe was fine to bring back. But then once I get up onto the boot, I'm bringing back in that really, that contrast line again that I don't want. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. And I'm just going to bring back in the top of the boot. And I'm going to check to see, actually, yeah, sometimes it'll eat into the heel. And sometimes it'll also eat into the bottom of the shoe. So I'm going to bring back in the pre-choke on the bottom of the shoe, on the top of it, but only the lower part. I'm not going to touch any of the rest of that boot. And I can probably do the same thing on the other side. Again, the area that's underneath her shoe needs to be brought back, and none of the rest of it, because the rest of it's just going to bring back that line. I'm going to double click on the hand, and I've actually now got a situation where I'm beginning to actually make my composite work better for me, because I no longer have that green screen part on there. I've actually brought that whole part in. Are we good on this part? Okay, as long as we're here, we are going to start slowly moving in. Today is mostly about retouching, which I swear to God I'm going to get to. But as long as we're here at this stage of the game, we need to actually think about how to make believable composites, because that's a big part of this class. When you guys look at this image, do you believe this? Why don't you? Say what? I'm sorry? Yeah, she looks like she's just been stuck on here. Why? There's no shadows. The shadows are the biggest thing that'll actually happen to us that'll cause us trouble in here. So we are going to get into extremely complex shadow creation in this class, compound shadows, really complex stuff. But I want to show you how to actually deal with shadows right now the way that I deal with them. I think it's the most successful way and the easiest way and the simplest way. How many people in here are doing composites already? How many people here have any interest in doing composites already? Oh, okay. Well, that's making me feel a little better. It's like, well, if you're not, why the fuck are you in this class? Anyway, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to show you the way that I do shadows. I'm going to show you the bad way, and then I'm going to show you the good way first. So, shadows always happen on top of the background, but underneath the figure. And why do I say that? If you click on the background layer right now to make it active, we're going to put a blank empty layer in between the two. So I'm going to click to put a layer in between the two. I'm going to double click on the name and I'll call it shadows. And say OK to that. I'm going to hit the B key to get a paintbrush. I'm going to make it a completely soft brush. I'm going to leave it as normal, 100% opacity, 100% flow. I'm going to pray that I can get my tablet to work. Woo, yay. I'm going to hit the D key to make my foreground and background colors black and white. If white is your background color, hit the X key to make it your foreground color. And then I'm going to zoom into her feet. And the reason you put your shadows underneath the figure and on top of the background is you can see right here. I want you to just take your brush and just paint across this really quick. And you can see that it actually goes on top of the background and underneath the figure, which is important for us. It makes it so much easier. I know people who will do this. They will actually bring the shadows on top of the figure, which covers the shoe, and then they will load their mask. So I'm loading the figure to the mask. I'm going to click on the shadows and actually add a layer to that, and then invert that mask so that it doesn't show on the shoe. What a pain in the ass to do that. Why would you do that? Simply, I'm going to throw the layer mask away, simply leave the shadows underneath the figure on top of the background and you've got exactly what you need. Okay, this is not really a good shadow for me, so I am going to do Command Alt and delete just to get rid of that part, Command D to deselect. And what some people will do is they simply paint their shadows. So they'll come in here and they'll actually start to paint, and they'll do a strong line that goes underneath one shoe, and then they'll actually try to do something that comes out on the edge like this, and they'll try to do that part, and they try to paint this all in, and then they'll just drop the opacity of this down, whatever, and they think that, okay, that looks like a shadow that might work, whatever. That looks horrible. There are people who can paint shadows really well. Is anybody in here an illustrator or a painter? If you are, you're welcome to paint your shadows, but that never has ever worked for me. So I'm going to show you a much better way of doing it. So again, if you've done that, I'm going to throw this entire layer away. I'm going to create a brand new one. I'm going to call it Shadow 1. And this is how you build shadows. The first two keyboard shortcuts that you need to deal with right now are the G key and the E key. The G key, if you click on the G key, it gives you the gradient tool. If you hit the E key, it gives you the eraser tool, which allows us to adjust the whatever shadow that we put in there. It allows you to fine-tune things. So hit the G key first. Make sure that your foreground and background colors are black and white. Then you'll see the gradient tool that we're looking for. Up at the very top, there is a preview of the gradient that actually is going from black to white. We need to change that. If you click, so I'm at the options bar all the way at the very top, right under the word file, there's a preview of the gradient. If you click on that, it's a drop-down menu. If you click on that drop-down menu, it will open up and there's a whole different series of possible gradients in here. But the one that we're looking for is in the basics folder. So if you click to open the basics folder, you will actually see that you have 3 possible gradients in here. If you hover over them, they will actually give you, or click on them, they will actually, you got to hover over them. Sorry. Sometimes it's really hard to get that hovering over thing to work. But nonetheless, the first gradient is foreground to background. The second gradient over is foreground to transparent. And the third one is just black to white. It doesn't matter what your foreground and background colors are. You need to select the second one. What we're looking for is our foreground color, which should be black, to white. Now, if white is your foreground color, simply click out of here. Click on the word Adobe. It'll get rid of that drop-down menu. Hit the X key to make sure that black is your foreground color, and then come right back up to this thing. And you want to click to make sure we are going from black to transparent. And you can sort of see that's what those little checkerboard things are about. Everybody good on that part? However, there's different types of gradients as well, and that is the 5 icons that are sitting just to the right of this. To see what these things really are, actually, let's just do another new image really quick. Command N, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it at still my same 8x10. And you can see what these different gradients are. The one that's closest to that drop-down menu that we're just on is a linear gradient. If you click on one side and drag, I'm just clicking on the left and dragging to the right, you can actually see it's actually going to go from black to transparent, and it does it in a linear fashion. It's the typical gradient everybody works with. Command Z to undo that. The one next to it is a radial gradient. If you click in the middle and drag out, you'll see it gives you a circle gradient. Again, it's going from black out to white. It fades it out. Command Z to undo that. The next one over, the one in the middle, is, if you click on this one, what it's supposed to represent is what it would look like looking down on a cone. It would be the shadowing of looking down on a cone. I don't ever really believe that one, I think, but anyway, that's what this gradient actually looks like, what it's supposed to be. Command Z to undo that. The next one over is a reflective gradient. So in this one, you want to click on the top and drag down to the bottom. And actually, let's start in the middle and click and drag down to the bottom. And let's start at the bottom and click down. So what we're actually getting here, this is continuing to build all of my gradients here, which is really weird because that usually doesn't happen. So I'm going to, again, fill my background with white. So white is my background color. Command Delete will fill it. And then I'm going to pull that gradient down really small right here. And so what you end up getting, what a reflected gradient does is it goes from foreground to, or in this case, background to foreground to background. So it's supposed to be reflected. And so this is basically what we end up with that. And then the last one, so Command Z to undo that. The last one, if you click and drag it, this is supposed to be, imagine you are inside an incredibly tall building that has no floors in it. And as you look up, everything converges to a single point because it goes up so high. That's what this thing is supposed to be. Command Z to undo that. The one that we want to use is the radial gradient. So if you click and drag it and it gives you this circle, this is what we're going to use to make our shadows. So again, to set this up, I'm going to close this up. I don't need to save it. To set this up, you need to make sure that you are white, that black is your foreground color, that you've set the gradient that goes from foreground to transparent, and that the radial gradient is the icon that's selected. It's the second of those little icons from the left. Is everybody good? Yes. Did you hit the G key? And then what do you have if you go up to that very top and click on the drop-down menu? What do you get? That's because it's hidden. So you want to come up to your window menu. Actually, maybe just come over here onto this. Yeah, click on that. Double click really fast on that menu. Okay, then come up to your window menu. Come down to workspace. Workspace at the top. And come down to reset your retouching file. Yep, click on it. And now hit the G key. Perfect, and click on this drop-down menu right here. Oh, you've got the paint bucket. Click on the icon that looks like the paint bucket. Yeah, click on that guy. Click again. Click and hold down. You get a drop-down menu, come to the gradient tool, and there it is. Click on that, go to basics. Click on the middle one. That's foreground to transparent, and then click on the radial gradient, that second icon right there. Perfect, and you're ready to go. So when you click on the G key, or the thing that was screwing her up was that this tool also is the paint bucket tool. And I don't know anybody who uses the paint bucket tool for anything, but at any rate. Okay, so we're ready to go on this. Make sure that you do have a shadow layer that is underneath your figure, but on top of the background. And I'm simply going to come over here. So watch my screen, watch how I do this really quickly, and then I'm going to undo it and do it all with you guys again. So you want to click and you want to drag out a gradient, and you'll see it gives you that black spot that feathers off. Your next move is to transform this. Command T will allow you to transform it. If you come up and you grab the handle at the very top, you can compress this. However, the better way to do that, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, is if you grab this handle and hold down the Option key, it will do the same. It will mirror it. So it will actually crush this from the top and the bottom. And what we're trying to do is come up with a flattened disc that I'm going to use to actually be my shadow that goes underneath this figure. You can also, still holding down the Option key, you can click the handle that's on the left or the right side, and you can actually make it narrower, or narrower or wider. You can also use your tool, once you bring your cursor outside of the control handles, you can actually rotate this. And so what I'm going to do is try to come up with what I think would be the proper shadow to actually go underneath this foot right here. So I can rotate this a little bit, I can bring it down, I can bring it slightly up, and that's actually a pretty good spot for me right now. So I'm going to hit the check mark to say okay to that. However, I have got now a shadow that's actually in front of this shoe, which could never happen. Again, the way the light is coming down on this, the shadow would be underneath her shoe, but I've got some that's right in the very front of it. So I hit the E key immediately, which gives me the eraser. I'm going to make my eraser a little bit larger. I'm going to set my eraser to a flow of 6. And then I'm simply going to scrub along this part right in here to get rid of the shadow that's in front of her shoe. Now, I also think that this shadow needs to go up a little bit higher. So you can simply hit the V key to get the move tool, and then go to your arrow keys and tap it in slowly to sort of bring it up underneath her shoe. And this is the shadow that I've started with. Shadows are really complex and multiplied, so this isn't the only one we're going to make on this side. So I'm going to do this with you guys right now. So let me throw this away. I'm going to add, I know, right? I'm going to add a brand new, and we're going to call it Shadow 1. So hit the G key to get the gradient tool. Click and drag out. Stop me. I'm just going to go through this, guys. Stop me if something goes wrong, okay? And we'll get it fixed right, because this will be a game changer for you. So everybody have a gradient? Okay, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Grab the top control handle or the bottom one, it doesn't matter which one that you actually grab. Hold down the Option key, click and compress it to more of a disc. And then the same thing going left to right. I mean, yours might be different. It just depends on the size of the gradient that you pulled out. But you can sort of see what it is you're looking for. Let go of the Option key and keep your cursor on the outside of the transform tools, and you can actually rotate it. Then put your cursor right inside the transform bounding square so you can actually click and move it. And then tweak it a little bit more so that it actually looks like it's running right under her shoe. And again, don't worry if you've got shadow that's coming too far out in front. We will actually fix that with the eraser tool. And I'm going to go ahead and click the check mark to say OK to that. Hit the E key to get the eraser. Make sure that your eraser mode is set to brush, that the opacity is 100%, that your flow is 6%. If you check the quality of your brush, I keep my brushes at a medium hardness. Again, you don't want something where you can really see that line, but you want control. And then I'm just going to scrub across the very front of that shoe to make sure that I don't have anything coming forward on that part at all. 50%. So this is the beginning of a shadow that's for this. I'm still going to just work on this one shoe by itself right now. I'm going to actually add another layer. It's really smart to keep your shadows, to build them step at a time so that you can go back and control opacity. Because the truth of it is, we're going to do a big shadow for her body that should actually be relatively light because you've got a lot of light flooding in around it. But the shadow that's immediately under her shoe, the one that's right under, closest to right on her shoe where it's really almost touching that ground, would be a much, much, much darker shadow than the big general one that's actually underneath her. So I do all of these shadows on independent layers so that I can individually control the opacity. If you did them all in one layer, that would be difficult to do, not impossible, but difficult to do. So I've got another layer going. I'm not going to bother renaming it right now because we've got a lot to get through today. But the G key to get a gradient tool, click and drag out. You get another gradient. Command T, hold down the Option key, crush this guy. I'm going to make this one now actually a little bit longer. I'm going to drag it out so that it's a little bit wider. Don't want that to happen. I'm going to rotate this guy as well. I'm going to bring it down and up underneath this. I'm looking to actually have more of a shadow that would actually explain what's going on back at her heel. So I'm pulling it so that it actually works on her heel. You'll see I've got a lot of it that's on the front of her boot that I don't want, but I do like the way it looks on the back of her heel. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark to say OK to that. Hit the E key to immediately get the eraser and erase everything that's actually in the front part of this at all. The only thing I wanted it was for the back part of her shoe. There's another part that's right underneath her toe that actually needs to be darker than it is right now. That's where some of the deepest shadow would actually be. So I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to hit the G key to get the gradient tool. I'm going to click and pull out a gradient. Command T to actually give me the transform tools. Hold down the Option key and crush this. And I'm going to keep it pretty much the little disc that it is right now. And I'm going to bring it right up underneath that part of her, her foot. I'm going to rotate it a little bit and kick it up a little bit higher. And say OK to that. Almost there. E key to get the eraser and get rid of all of that spill that's actually coming out in front of this part as well. Yes?
How do I do the, like for the shadows, how do I move it like a pixel at a time? Is it you said Command E? Like to move it?
No. So here, check it out, because I'm going to do her other foot right now because I'm feeling pretty good about this one. So I'm going to, again, click on a brand new layer. The G key will give me the gradient tool. Click and drag down, you get the gradient. Command T will bring up the transform dialog box so you get the transform handles that are around it, right? Hold down the Option key and click on the top control handle, and if you hold the Option key, instead of moving just one side, you actually move both sides to compress it. If you want to move it, simply click inside the box and it'll let you move it around. If you want to then make it more narrow, again, hold down the Option key and click on the one on the side and bring it in. You can still make it a narrower shape. I mean, you can continue to control this all you want. To rotate it, you keep your tool outside of the bounding box. To move it, you put it inside the bounding box and you just move it.
Wait, I thought you said there was a way to move it with not the arrow keys on there, but on your.
Oh, you can. So once you get this set, but you can't do it while you're still doing all the transform work. So let me get this one set first, and I feel pretty good about this one right here. I've got a lot of stuff that's on the outside, so I'm going to make this a little bit more narrow so I don't have to erase quite so much. And then I'm going to go ahead and accept that, hit the check mark. Then if I want to use my arrow keys to move things up, down, left, or right, hit the V key, that's the move tool. And then your arrow keys just move things up and down, or left and right. So again, on my one right here, I had to hit the E key to get the eraser tool and get rid of any stuff that's on the side because that doesn't belong there. And in this case, I'm feeling pretty good about this shadow right now. That actually feels reasonably good to me where it is right now and sort of the quality of it. I'm going to do one last one. So I'm going to hit another blank layer, and this is going to be the shadow for her whole body. So there would be a slight one. She would be casting a shadow, a slight one underneath her whole body. So G key to get the gradient tool, click and drag out. Command T to bring up the transfer dialog box. Option key to actually bring it down, pull it a little further apart. Slide the whole thing down so that it's really sort of underneath all of her body. That feels pretty good to me right now. I'm going to say OK to that. And then you need to drop the opacity this way down. So I'm going to crank the opacity down to like a 30%. And you think, well, it's gone. You don't see it. But if you turn this thing on and off, you can see it definitely is adding shadow part to that. I'm looking at the shadow that's underneath her right foot, and I like that one. The one that's under her left foot seems a little bit too strong to me. So I need to go back into my layers stack, and I'm pretty sure it's the second one. Nope, it's the third one. Nope, it's layer number 1. It's that back shadow that's all the way in the back. I can also see when I turn this thing on and off that I still have part of that shadow that's on the very front. So make sure that you select that layer, the E key to get the eraser, and get rid of everything else that is in the front part of that. So that part's all gone. But you also need to drop the opacity. It's too strong. So I'm going to pull this way back so that it's not as strong. A little bit stronger than that. And then the one that's right under it, the original shadow, also needs to drop in its opacity. It's too strong. And double click on the hand. Do we feel better about her being anchored in this space now? Yes, we do. So, choking and spreading. The final thing that I would do here really quickly, so we could make a copy of this image right now of my smart object that's at the top. We could make a copy of this because, again, I've got spill that's on this. However, we can leave the smart object the way it is, and I can still get rid of the spill that's on her hair. I've removed most of it from the rest of her body. There's still some on her shoes, but I'll show you how to do that part. To do that, I'm going to put a blank layer up on top of my smart object. Again, I could make a copy of my smart object, rasterize it, and once it was rasterized, I could paint on the smart object. But this other will do the trick just as well. So I'm going to put a blank layer on top of this. I'm going to change the blending mode of that blank layer. First I'm going to name it Spill Removal. And say OK. I'm going to change the blending mode of that layer to color. So instead of our typical spill removal, what we do is we set our brush to a blend mode of color. In this case, I'm going to set the entire layer to a blend mode of color because it's a separate layer. And then hit the B key to get a brush and check to see. I'm going to make it a soft brush. I'm going to leave its blending mode at normal, 100% opacity, 100% flow. I'm going to hover over this girl's hair and hold down the Option key and click to get the color sampler tool. It will actually sample that color of hair, and then simply come in here and actually start to paint the spill out. However, when I paint the spill out, you'll notice that it's actually, that it's not just going on her hair, it's actually going on the entire image. I mean, look at it. If I paint out here, you can see it's actually changing all of the leaves, it's changing all of that stuff. So some people would say, well, then all you need to do is just make a copy of the layer mask and put it on your spill removal. Instead, you can do what they call a clipping group, and that's what we're going to do instead. To get something to clip, what you do is hover your cursor right between the two layers. So I'm hovering my cursor between the spill removal layer that I made and the figure. I'm putting my cursor right between the two. Hold down your Option key and you will see that your cursor changes to a little square with an arrow that points down. If you click on that, you will also notice, if you click on that, you will notice that your spill removal layer shifts over to the right with a little arrow that points straight down. That little arrow that's pointing straight down tells you that this is now being clipped to the Smart Object layer right underneath it, and the layer mask will then control what you can and you cannot see in this image. Does that make sense? To see what I really mean by that, change the blending mode of this spill removal layer back to normal. And then we're going to grab, just hit the D key to default your foreground and background colors to black and white. Again, I've got a normal brush in here, and just take your brush and just start to paint across. And you can see that because you've clipped this layer to the one underneath it, the mask is in control of what is shown in that on that layer. All right, yes. Let me see.
He's not there anymore. Things, yeah.
All right, so we're going to add, oh, you're clipping that down. That's not what we want to do. Again, your spill removal layer needs to be on top. Okay. Right, and now we're going to clip that to this. So now click, and now it's correct. So now again, if you take a brush and paint in here, it will not go anywhere except for where the layer mask lets it. Did that work for the rest of you? Clipping groups? Are we good on this part? It's looking very different. Are you good?
Yeah, no, my computer's just messing with me, but I'm good.
All right, so I'm going to go back in history to undo that. Again, my layer is clipped down. My blending mode of that layer is set to color. And then again, I'm back to just a regular brush. Sample the color down at the bottom and get rid of the spill that's on the bottom part. Do the same thing that's on the top. And do the same thing that's in here. If we take a look at the shoes, again, that's where we've got another spill problem. So I'm simply going to sample the color down there and get rid of the spill that's on her boots. And the other boot. And we're off to the races. Yeah. How do I, what? Just hold down the Option key and click.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like painting in the color.
Oh yeah.
So I click it.
Yeah.
Like when I paint on it, it's like.
Because you need to set this blend mode of this layer to color.
I did it up there.
Yeah. No, you don't want to do the brush. You want to do the layer, and that goes back to normal.
So this is normal. And then this is color.
No,
okay,
the brush, we're going to keep the blending mode of the brush normal because we've set the blending mode of the layer to color.
Does it matter if the layer is also color and the brush is also color?
It does. And guys, if you can't remember this part, just throw this whole thing away. make a copy of this background layer, Command J to actually make a copy of it. We're going to rasterize this now. I'm going to turn off the virgin copy of this because you don't want these two stacked on top of each other, because wherever you have transparency in here will double stack against that, so you don't want to do it. You can see it right here. Take a look at my screen really quickly. If I have two layers on, the spill gets much more intense. Anywhere where there's any sort of transparency is doubled up if you've got both of these layers on. So I'm just going to click this top layer, click on the layer menu, drop down and come down to either Smart Objects, Rasterize, or Rasterize Smart Object. Either one does the exact same thing. It's no longer a smart object, so now I can paint directly on that layer. So again, my B key to get a brush. In this case, I would change my brush blending mode to color because my the layer itself that I'm working on is set to normal, and then just do the same thing. We've done this before. Click on this to sample my color, and then simply go through and get rid of all the spill. If you run into a case like this, take a look at this my screen really quickly. You can see I'm removing the spill, but look at the color that I just put in here. This color is actually wrong. It's you can really spot it. It's got way too much red in it. You could undo it, but you can also just sample a new color. So I'm going to sample something that's got a little more brown in it and just go right back over it again. Again, you're not changing any of the luminosity. You're just changing the color. And so any color that you have, you don't have to keep that color. And we'll get rid of all of this and all of that. Anyway. Are there questions about any of this that we just went through? Okay, guys. No, shoot.
Do you have pro tips on shadows? Mine was really bad. I'm not gonna lie. Like things that I can keep in mind to make my shadows.
So the trick to doing shadows that I think are the most successful is do a lot of them. Build your shadows up slowly. That's the biggest trick. And then drop your opacity. If they're too strong, it's almost as bad as not having them. Yeah.
When you do the gradient tool, can you do the same thing with white as well? So you can have like a big white circle, or
Yeah, I could. No, I mean, but again, shadows are dark, so I don't know what the white would do.
No, just like
to have just a thing?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, all of this. I mean, you can do anything. Like right now, I've got brown as my foreground color. So if I hit the gradient tool, I'll just do a layer on top. G key. I'm going to pull out a brown gradient now. Undo. If I hit the X key, I'll pull out a white gradient right now. Again, white's transparent. Did that answer what you're asking? Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. To do what? Oh, of course. Yeah, so if you wanted like sun flare. Yeah. No, this would be certainly a good way to actually start doing it. Most light that you see like that, it depends. If you're trying to emulate flare is actually completely white. It's blown out. The reason it looks flary, for lack of a better way of putting it, is that so much light is those little buckets that we were talking about that make up your sensor. It's filled the bucket completely, but you keep adding more light to it, and all of that light you keep adding to the full bucket spills over into the buckets that are right next to it, and that's what causes flare. But by definition, you've completely filled the bucket. There's no more room left in it, and that's a full bucket is white. Okay, guys, why don't we do one more quick break? I've got 3:40 right now, a hard 10 minutes, so be back at 3:50, and we'll try to do retouching in an hour. Are there any questions about any of this? We good?